In southeastern Massachusetts, there's a region defined by low-lying forests, wetlands, and glacial rock formations. It covers roughly 200 square miles, a mix of small towns, power lines, reservoirs, and protected conservation land. From the air, the patchwork of woods and bogs seems ordinary, but the closer you look, the more you realize how much of it resists easy explanation. Police logs in the area document decades of unusual reports. Unidentified lights, strange animal sightings, unexplained disappearances, and incidents that leave no clear evidence behind. Archaeologists note prehistoric rock carvings and ceremonial structures whose purpose isn't fully understood. Pilots have logged navigational anomalies, while hikers describe losing track of time or orientation. Even local wildlife biologists record migration behaviors that don't seem to fit expected patterns. For generations, the land has been a backdrop for events that overlap science, folklore, and human perception. The region's rivers are said to shift color under certain atmospheric conditions. Electromagnetic equipment sometimes malfunctions without a visible cause. In certain areas of the swamp, compasses drift several degrees off north, and when people return to the same site days later, they often find it subtly changed, as if something about the environment resets. Researchers, law enforcement, and local residents have tried to document these patterns using standard investigative methods. The data never converges on a single logical explanation. The experiences seem disassociated or random. Over time, the reports have accumulated into something larger, a boundary, both geographic and psychological. It's a space where normal statistical odds of strange events appears to change. Not a haunted place in the traditional sense, but a complex system of natural and human factors that seem to interact in unpredictable ways. And the closer you get to the center of that system, the more those odds increase and the uncanny takes place. This is Arcane Station, a podcast that investigates unexplained phenomena with an evidence-based approach. I'm your host, Mike Porter. Tonight, we're looking into a region in Massachusetts that's earned an unusual reputation, the Bridgewater Triangle. It's a place where folklore, official reports, and measurable anomalies all converge in a defined area. Within its borders, you'll find stories of lights in the sky, unexplained creatures, ritual sites, and disappearances, but also geological and atmospheric conditions that may influence how people experience reality itself. This episode isn't about chasing legends or endorsing a single interpretation. It's about examining the evidence that's been collected and how it's been studied, and what might connect the range of activity reported there. We'll consider environmental data, psychological effects, and the long history of human presence in the area. By the end, you may not have a single answer, but you'll have a clearer sense of how this region functions as kind of a laboratory for what we call high strangeness. So, long before European settlement, the region was home to the Wampanoag people. Their territory covered much of what is now southeastern Massachusetts and part of Rhode Island. The landscape is a complex system of wetlands, rivers, and forest corridors that supported hunting, fishing, and seasonal migration. Among these areas, one stands out. It's a vast wetland that the earliest people in the region called the Hockomock Swamp. The Wampanoag name translates roughly to a place where spirits dwell. The swamp wasn't feared by the indigenous people, but it was respected. It was a boundary between the physical and the spiritual world, a location used for ceremony, burial, and guidance. Oral tradition describes it as a place where messages could be received from ancestors or entities that protected the land. When European colonists arrived in the 1600s, they saw the swamp differently. To them, it was an obstacle, difficult to cross, filled with insects and unpredictable terrain, but also thick vegetation. During the conflict known as King Philip's War in the 1670s, the swamp became a stronghold for the Wampanoag and their allies. Led by Metacom, known to the English as King Philip, the Wampanoag resisted colonial expansion and cultural pressures that came with it. The dense wetlands and vegetation provided cover, food, and mobility. Colonial militias called it the Devil's Swamp, not only for its difficulty, but for the resistance that seemed to rise from it. Skirmishes, disappearances, and sudden attacks often came from within the fog. After the war, colonial settlers began to treat the area as cursed ground. The battlefields were left undisturbed. Farmers avoided cutting too deeply into the wetland edges. Over time, those attitudes formed a layer of folklore that mixed with the Wampanoag spiritual interpretation of the place. By the 18th and 19th centuries, towns had grown around the perimeter of the wetlands. The industrial area brought mills, canals, and power lines, but the interior regions remained largely unchanged. Hunters, surveyors, and loggers who entered the deeper sections of the swamp sometimes reported disorientation, missing time, or seeing figures at a distance that they couldn't explain. Archaeologists have since found stone formations, effigies, and petroglyphs that suggest ceremonial activity continued long after colonial contact. The meaning of many of these features remains uncertain. They appear to align with solstices, river paths, or magnetic north, features that, to me, suggest intention and ritual dominated these ruins. There's also a death spirit in that area known as Hockomock. So these features, these ruins, could be effigies or places of worship for Hockomock. What's notable is that throughout 4 centuries of human interaction, from pre-contact to modern times, the same section of land has remained a focal point for both cultural meaning and unexplained events. That continuity across such different worldviews is one of the most compelling aspects of the region's history. Now I want to break down the geology and environmental factors of the triangle. When you step into the heart of southeastern Massachusetts, it's easy to forget that the ground beneath you is far older and stranger than it looks. According to science, in the supercontinent Pangaea, which was formed by the collision of land masses around 300 million years ago, the land that makes up the Massachusetts area was part of a large supercontinent, positioned adjacent to what is now would be known as northwestern Africa, specifically the anti-Atlas region of Monaco. The eastern half of the state, known as the Avalon Terrain, originally formed as a volcanic island arc off the supercontinent of Gondwana and later collided with the Laurentia during the formation of Pangaea. The collision between North America and Africa formed a vast mountain range, the remnants of which are still present to this day as the Appalachian Mountains. The wetlands and forests that define this region sit within what geologists call the Narragansett Basin, a landscape formed hundreds of millions of years ago when the ancient rivers and glaciers shaped the land into layers of sandstone, shale, and gravel. Over time, ice sheets scraped their way across the terrain, leaving behind ridges, stones, and low basins that filled with water. What resulted was one of the most complex wetland systems in New England, a massive sponge of peat and mud that never fully dries. That combination of rock, water, and decay gives the area some unique physical properties. The peat, formed from centuries of rotting vegetation, holds an incredible amount of moisture and minerals. It's acidic and conductive, and it's alive with the slow chemical reaction processes. When you walk there, you're walking on a churning biological process, one that constantly releases gases like methane as it breaks down organic material. On warm days, those gases bubble to the surface and shimmer across the water, creating the illusion of light or motion when nothing is there. Below that layer lies a foundation that's just as interesting. Granite, rich in quartz, and feldspar sits not far from the swamp's perimeter. Under stress from shifting groundwater, freeze-thaw cycles, or minor seismic movement, the quartz can generate small electrical charges. Scientists studying earthquake lights have proven that rocks under pressure can release short electromagnetic bursts. In a region surrounded by granite, intersected by iron-rich soils and moving water, it's not unreasonable to imagine faint electromagnetic fluctuations as part of the regular landscape. And then there's iron. The groundwater here carries it naturally, and where oxygen meets that water, the iron settles out as a reddish deposit known as bog iron. Early settlers even mined it to make tools. Today, those same iron concentrations can subtly interfere with compasses and handheld instruments. Many of the old reports of spinning needles or magnetic drift line up perfectly with areas known to have these deposits. In the air above, the same chemistry that feeds the wetlands also shapes how sound and light move. The broad, flat expanse creates an ideal condition for temperature inversions, layers of warm air sitting atop cooler air near the ground. Those inversions bend sound waves and light in unusual ways. Voices can travel for miles and seem to come from nowhere. Light sources can appear displaced, hovering, or moving when they're actually distant reflections. Under certain conditions, the air becomes a natural lens. Add infrasound to the mix, which is a very low-frequency sound wave produced by wind, storms, or even the movement of air over the open marsh, and these frequencies are often below the range of human hearing, but not below the range of human response. Experiments have shown that infrasound can cause feelings of anxiety, disorientation, or even visual disturbances. In a landscape like this with open water, tree lines, and shifting weather, those frequencies can be amplified and focused. All of these elements, electricity in the rocks, magnetism in the soil, gases in the air, and sound vibrating just below awareness, combine to make the place that behaves differently than most natural environments. Instruments sometimes malfunction, not because of the paranormal, but because the natural forces here are unusually active and intertwined. People lose their sense of direction because landmarks are uniform and visibility can change in seconds due to fog or condensation or whatever it might be. What looks like a glowing orb might be methane catching the light of a distant headlamp through a refractive pocket of air. But while each of these factors can be used to explain things individually, together they form a setting that is consistently bending perception. It's a natural amplifier of light, sound, magnetism, and human experience. That makes it an ideal environment for strange reports. If reality anywhere were going to feel unstable, this is the place it would be. The importance of this geology isn't in proving any single mystery, it's that the landscape itself provides a framework for the high strangeness that has been recorded here for generations. Every light, every sound, every sensation has the potential to be magnified by the natural machinery of the swamp. When we consider the long history of unexplained events in the area, these physical conditions offer a baseline reading of elevated strangeness. This stage shapes how both instruments and human senses interpret what happens here. So let's switch some gears here and look into my favorite subject of all time, accounts and evidence of cryptids. Reports of unidentified animals in the region date back to the 1930s and continue through to the present. Most involve large bipedal figures or oversized birds. In 1970, local newspapers covered sightings near the swamp of a hair-covered creature resembling a gorilla or bear. Police searches turned up no animal or footprints consistent with known wildlife. The area's low visibility and presence of tall cattails likely contributed to conflicting witness descriptions, but the consistency across accounts of a height between 6 to 7 feet, dark fur, and distinctive odor has kept it active in local files. Throughout the 70s and 80s, residents in the area reported similar figures crossing roads or moving through yards near forest boundaries. Independent researchers have mapped clusters of reports near water channels and power line easements. Wildlife experts who reviewed these claims point out that black bears do occasionally stand upright and can appear humanoid at a distance. However, Massachusetts state biologists note that the black bear populations in the region were nearly non-existent at the time, making misidentification less likely. Other cryptid-type accounts have involved giant birds or pterodon-like shapes observed flying low over the marshland. These appear mostly during transitional weather, so fog, electrical storms, or late dusk. While ornithologists have attributed these to cranes or herons viewed under distortion, the frequency of reports from law enforcement officers and pilots give them enduring interest. As an example, one account from an officer who saw one up close said that it had around a 12-foot wingspan. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about that. Now let's move from cryptids to the extraterrestrial. People in the region have recorded multiple UFO or UAP type incidents since the late 1960s. FAA logs note periodic radar anomalies over the triangle, often dismissed as temperature inversions or radar clutter. One of the better documented cases occurred in 1976 when several local officers observed a large triangular-shaped object with colored lights hovering near a radio tower. The incident produced no radar confirmation, and the object departed without acceleration visible to the witnesses. The police reports from that night are still part of local archives and have been reviewed by national UFO investigators. Civilian sightings of luminous spheres or orbs are common. Some appear stationary over the swamp, others are described as darting movements near a tree line, and there are atmospheric explanations that include ionized gas from decaying organic matter, misidentified aircraft, and reflections from urban lighting. Nonetheless, these orbs are repeatedly reported in the same sections of wetland where the compass deviations in EMF fluctuations have been measured. Sometimes these orbs seem to move against the wind, follow travelers, move more quickly and in random directions than floating gas pockets would account for. This may suggest paranormal and apparitional activity. Residents and visitors frequently describe voices, shadow figures, and transient human shapes near the swamp perimeter, particularly at dusk or early morning. Many of these reports come from hikers or paranormal investigation teams using audio recorders and thermal imaging. Some accounts reference a figure known locally as the red-headed hitchhiker, seen along Route 44. This is a man appearing suddenly at the roadside and then vanishing when approached. The details vary, but the pattern has persisted for decades. Other reports involve phantom fires or lights that mimic lanterns. These often occur near old colonial paths and burial grounds on the edge of the swamp. The local fire department has responded to several such calls, finding no physical source once on site. Then there's EVP sessions that have captured low-frequency murmurs, and EVP means electronic voice phenomenon, and it's usually picked up through recorders or some device that makes a static sound, and then voices come through dynamically as part of the spirit's interaction with that process. So anyway, these sessions have captured the low-frequency murmurs and short phrases in unoccupied areas. Audio analysts reviewing these clips note that many fall within the range of low-level environmental noise, so that could be dismissed, but the distinct articulation in some of the samples keeps them under review. And beyond the EVP claims, there are recurring acoustic phenomena. This may suggest audio and environmental anomalies. Researchers have documented the certain sudden drops in ambient sound, total silence lasting several seconds, followed by disorientation among participants. Weather instruments show no wind change at those times, suggesting a localized infrasound pocket or pressure inversion. Hunters and hikers have described subaudible vibrations, a sense of internal pressure or dizziness in certain clearings. Some sound engineers who tested the area measure infrasound frequencies between 17 and 19 hertz, consistent with the resonance that can cause unease or peripheral vision distortions in humans. This is due to the resonance of the human eye at 19 hertz, which would cause a sympathetic vibration, similar to one tuning fork causing another to vibrate at the same frequency. The same environmental conditions that create these low-frequency waves, temperature gradients, wind shear, and broad water surfaces, also amplify natural sounds. Frogs, owls, or distant machinery can carry for miles and become directionless, leading to reports of untraceable voices or screams. When investigating these claims, using instrumentation can help determine a root cause. However, there have been difficulties in obtaining solid data due to the environmental and atmospheric conditions that distort readings. Independent teams have collected data using electromagnetic field meters, Geiger counters, and magnetometers since the 1970s. The results show intermittent spikes in both EM and magnetic readings without clear correlation to electrical infrastructure. Typically, electromagnetic fields are generated through electrical processes, and I did say that there are things in the ground that could cause that, but when you have reading fluctuations, either there's some sort of active process that's taking place, like things rubbing together that's causing that electrical interference, or that also could suggest some sort of spirit or otherworldly manifestation that causes this EMF spike. In several controlled tests conducted at known hotspot coordinates, compass deviations ranged from between 5 and 8 degrees off true north. Repeated measurements under similar weather conditions did not produce the anomaly, suggesting transient or interference-based causes. And again, I think geological processes could have something to do with that, especially with the feldspar in the ground. Thermal cameras occasionally register sudden cold spots of up to 10 degrees below ambient air temperature, though these often coincide with moisture or air movement and possibly could be gas as well. No formal scientific body has verified a consistent anomaly, but the persistence of irregular data, combined with a long record of human observation, continues to attract attention from researchers across disciplines. So, what do we think the overall pattern might be? Across all categories, cryptid, aerial, paranormal, and environmental, the reoccurring pattern is spatial concentration. Different phenomena appear to cluster within overlapping coordinates of wetland, granite boundary, and high water table. Witness reliability varies, but the consistency of geography can't be ignored. Whether interpreted as folklore, misidentification, or an unknown geological process, the phenomena share the same physical boundary, the same section of land that has challenged explanation for centuries. So moving from the paranormal and the environmental, there's also a human factor involved, and that's cult activity. During the 70s and the early 80s, all the way up to the 90s, local law enforcement began to receive unusual category of reports from within and around the swamp. Animal mutilations, desecrated cemeteries, and evidence of ritual activity. The most cited cases came from the mid-1980s when officers from multiple jurisdictions discovered animal carcasses arranged in geometric patterns near remote access points. Investigations by the Bristol County Sheriff's Office and local police found signs of candle use, shallow fire pits, and crude symbols carved into nearby trees. In a few cases, graffiti matched the iconography popularized by heavy metal subculture at the time, rather than any organized ritual group. Law enforcement publicly linked many of these incidents to vandalism, trespassing, and youth activity, though internal memoranda noted a recurring site pattern: remote wooded areas, accessed by dirt path, and proximity to water or stone outcroppings. Between 1983 and 1988, several reports of missing pets and livestock were logged in the surrounding towns, often with ritual speculation added by local press. None of these cases resulted in prosecution tied to occult practice. However, the volume of reports did influence how residents perceived the swamp, shifting its image from a natural oddity to a potential site of organized occult activity. Nationally, in the late 1970s through the early 1990s, what we saw is what historians now refer to as the Satanic Panic, a widespread moral and cultural fear that organized satanic networks were conducting rituals and crimes across the United States. And I'm not saying that that's not taking place, but it started to become very popularized during the 80s when I was going to high school. High-profile court cases, sensationalized media coverage, and talk show segments reinforced public anxiety about hidden cults operating in small towns and rural spaces. I'm sure he would have taken care of that situation had the devil arisen while we were playing the game. So the Bridgewater region is not immune to that climate. Local newspapers and radio stations frequently referenced ritual sites in the swamp. Though much of this coverage leaned on speculation or anonymous tips, State police in Massachusetts issued public statements at the time clarifying that no evidence of an organized satanic group had been verified in the area. Still, the combination of real vandalism cases, unsolved disappearances, and the swamp's existing reputation created a feedback loop. Legitimate law enforcement activity lent credibility to rumor, while rumor increased public vigilance, generating more calls and reports. By the early 1990s, investigative journalists revisiting the files found that most cases labeled cult-related were ultimately categorized as juvenile vandalism or isolated criminal behavior. A few incidents, such as the discovery of human remains later identified as an unrelated homicide victim, were initially folded into the same narrative before being separated by forensic evidence. Even after the moral panic subsided nationally, the idea of a ritual activity in the swamp persisted. Modern paranormal investigators sometimes find remnants of candles, bones, or symbols and interpret them as contemporary occult practice. There was also evidence of ropes tied in trees in a manner that suggested restraints. Archaeologists and local police typically identify these materials as either animal remains from hunters, perhaps using the ropes to process the animals, or debris from decades of unverified ritual interest. The persistence of these associations suggests that human belief and rumor contribute directly to the region's mythology. Once the swamp became known as a place of power, whether spiritual or paranormal, it began attracting people seeking that atmosphere. Some perform genuine religious or neo-pagan rituals. Others visit as thrill seekers. Each visit adds to the accumulation of artifacts that later reinforce the legend. I think it may also power the place with energies of intention. Sociologists studying the area note a pattern of consistency with psychological reinforcement. The more a place is framed as a site of darkness or mystery, the more likely it is to attract individuals whose actions maintain that reputation. This process is measurable. Media coverage spikes precede increases in trespassing arrests, graffiti reports, and unofficial nighttime investigations. From a purely human perspective, this feedback system sustains the phenomenon even without any external force. The landscape becomes a mirror for expectation. People go there to find strangeness, and in doing so, they generate it. Unfortunately, this cycle hasn't always been harmless. In 1978, the murder of 15-year-old Mary Lou Arruda in the Bridgewater Triangle region brought national attention to the area. Her body was discovered tied to a tree in the Freetown State Forest, a part of the triangle long associated with the supposed occult rituals and strange happenings. Though her killer was eventually convicted and the crime had no proven ritual connection, the brutality of the case reinforced public fears. For many locals, it blurred the line between rumor and reality, anchoring the swamp's dark reputation in genuine tragedy. The documented ritual evidence from the Bridgewater region fits within the broader American moral climate of the late 20th century. While credible reports of animal mutilations and vandalism exist, there's no verified evidence of a sustained cult organization or coordinated ritual crime in the area. What remains significant is the pattern of belief and participation, how fear, media, and human behavior can merge to turn a geographical location into a psychological landscape. So while everything we've talked about seems to be disparate pieces of evidence, I want to suggest a unified theory here. When we step back and view the Bridgewater region through the accumulated data, the geology, atmospheric behavior, historical continuity, and range of human experiences, a consistent structure begins to form. The anomalies may not point to one extraordinary cause, but to an interaction between environment and consciousness. The working theory is simple. This area functions as a coupled spiritual quantum system. The environment provides a physical substrate with unusual properties, and human intention provides the energy that shapes outcomes within that field. When the two intersect, probability itself may shift. The foundation begins with the land. The swamp sits atop a combination of granite, iron, peat, and slow-moving water, a system rich in electromagnetic and acoustic potential. Granite contains quartz, which under stress can emit small electromagnetic changes. The water table amplifies those fields, conducting them through the saturated peat and mineral layers. Iron deposits subtly alter local magnetism. The peat and methane emissions affect air density, sound propagation, and visibility. Together, these conditions create a zone where the normal boundaries of perception and measurement are unstable, not in a supernatural sense, but in a literal, physical one. Instruments show noises, compasses drift, radio and EMF meters record transient spikes. Add to that the sky prone to temperature inversions. Those inversions bend sound and light, distorting what witnesses see and hear. Infrasound waves generated by wind over open water can trigger unease, disorientation, even visual distortions in sensitive individuals. In short, the region's natural physics generate conditions where reality feels uncertain. Human beings enter that environment carrying expectation, belief, and emotion. When enough people concentrate attention on a place, it becomes an observational hotspot, not just socially, but potentially physically. Focused intention alters how sensory data is processed and may even affect the outcome of chance events. Whether through psychology or a deeper quantum mechanism, attention collapses probabilities. In an ordinary environment, that collapse is imperceptible. Here, the system is already on edge. Electromagnetic fields fluctuate, light refracts, and low-frequency sound moves through the body. Under those conditions, the act of observation becomes an amplifier. Fear, fascination, and ritualized curiosity align with the land's own oscillations. The result is a localized rise in low-probability outcomes, the kind of events that we call high strangeness. When the same factors repeat in other places, the pattern appears. At Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, investigators report electromagnetic bursts, infrasound, and light distortions over a mesa rich in conductive minerals and groundwater. In Vermont's Bennington Triangle, granite ridges and dense forests form a natural electromagnetic cavity. In both cases, reports of lights, cryptid figures, and disorientation match what's observed here. The environmental substrates differ, but the ingredients are the same: mineral composition, moisture, geologic stress, and human expectation. The more attention a site receives, the stronger the feedback loop becomes. News coverage, documentaries, and online discussions focus millions of minds on the same coordinates. Investigators return year after year. Each visit, each retelling, reinforces the field of attention. From a quantum perspective, that concentration of observation could influence the behavior of particles, waves, or information fields. From a spiritual perspective, it channels intention into a living system that responds. Testing the theory would require instruments as sensitive to human presence as to physical change. Synchronized EMF sensors, magnetometers, infrasound monitors, and psychological metrics recorded side by side. The hypothesis predicts that these spikes in anomaly reports will correspond with measurable environmental changes, shift in magnetic fields, air pressure, or sound frequency. It also predicts that teams entering with high expectations will experience and record more anomalies than those approaching neutrally, even under identical conditions. If data eventually shows no correlation, this theory fails, and that would be valuable knowledge. But if a consistent relationship appears between environmental variables and focused attention, it would suggest that consciousness and environment can, under certain conditions, form a coupled system where probabilities collapse in response to awareness. The implications extend far beyond Massachusetts. It would mean that so-called window areas, places of overlapping anomalies, are not supernatural but interactive. Each represents a naturally sensitive node in the landscape where energy, geology, and observation converge. The system remains dormant until attention activates it. In this view, high strangeness is not random. It is the predictable expression of a world that reacts to being watched. After centuries of folklore, hundreds of investigations, and thousands of witness accounts, the Bridgewater region still refuses to yield a single explanation. But taken together, the evidence suggests that it operates as more than just a stage for isolated events. It behaves like a system, one shaped by geology, atmosphere, biology, and human consciousness. Every layer contributes to the outcome. These are measurable realities. Then there's the human factor. When people enter this environment with curiosity, fear, or reverence, their presence becomes part of the system itself. Across the data, a pattern repeats. Whenever environmental sensitivity and concentrated human focus overlap, improbable events emerge. They manifest as cryptid sightings, unexplained lights, electromagnetic interference, or sensations of presence, the collapse of probabilities in a responsive field. If this interpretation is correct, it reframes how we view high strangeness. These places aren't haunted in the traditional sense, and they're not necessarily portals or tears in reality. They're living systems, energetic environments tuned to both physical and mental frequencies. The paranormal becomes less about ghosts or aliens and more about how consciousness interacts with complex natural fields. That interaction may be spiritual, quantum, or both. The distinction may not matter. Science and spirituality could simply be describing the same process from different vantage points, one using data, the other using meaning. The Bridgewater Triangle stands as a microcosm of that possibility. It's a landscape that records every human thought directed towards it, and a natural field sensitive enough to respond. In that sense, it doesn't produce the strange, it amplifies it. The lesson from this investigation isn't to fear such places, but to approach them with awareness. Attention has consequences. Intention shapes outcome. And when the environment is right, even a single moment of focus may be enough to tip the odds towards the extraordinary. Alright, that's it. You've been listening to Arcane Station, where we examine the edges of science, spirituality, history, and the unexplained. The Bridgewater region is one of many places where the boundary between the measurable and the mysterious seems thin. Whether we approach it with sensors or prayer, the result's the same. Something responds. That response might come from geology, from consciousness, or from a mechanism we've yet named. But it's there, waiting for observation. If you had experiences in or around the Bridgewater Triangle or in other regions that share similar traits, like the Bennington Triangle, the Mesa at Skinwalker Ranch, or anywhere that feels different in a way you can't quantify, I'd like to hear from you. Your first-hand account helps connect the scientific and spiritual data to the human experience that defines these sites. You can reach me at mike@arcane-station.com or on my different social media platforms. If you've enjoyed this investigation, please follow, share, and leave a review. It helps others discover the show and keeps these explorations going. Next time on Arcane Station, we'll turn our focus to another cryptid, the Jersey Devil. I hope to see you there.